Hello and welcome to another of my series of conversations. My name is John Cornicello and I'm going to go live on Mondays and Thursdays at 10 Pacific and 1 Eastern. However, there's going to be a special Wednesday edition of the conversation coming up on July 22nd with Arlene Evans and George Varanakis to talk about photo conferences, trade shows, and magazines and how they're being affected and what the future might look like. For today, my guest is artist turned activist Benjamin Von Wong. Many of you know his big photo projects, but photography isn't his main outlet these days. So we're going to talk about the journey from art to activism, how to become an effective and responsible activist, and how to measure your impact. So let me please introduce to you Benjamin Von Wong.
Hey, what's up?
Hey.
Hello from Canada.
How is things going in this age of COVID for you?
Things are going good for me. Personally took the opportunity to travel inwards, picked up routines, meditation, gratitude, all these weird things that I never thought I was ever going to do. Spending time with family. My sister gave birth, so I'm a new uncle as of
Congrats.
4 weeks ago. Experimenting with art like this, making these things out of paper, which is super cool. And I have a podcast called Impact Everywhere that explores positive impact in unexpected places. So those are the things keeping me busy right now.
I think I saw someplace you're trying to learn Illustrator.
Yeah, well, specifically to create these paper art things. I design. Wow, this background is not working so well for this.
There it shows over there.
Yeah, I can turn it off though. Here we go. Ta-da! So these is like just layers of paper. So I needed to figure out how to do vectors in order to create these. So it's just an excuse to learn a new Adobe tool. Do you know they have 50 Adobe desktop tools? 50. Most people don't even know the names of all these. Anyways, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And that's not counting the iPad apps and the phone apps.
I've always struggled with Illustrator, but I live in Photoshop and Lightroom.
Oh, it's really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's start with positive impact in unexpected places.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
So, I think when I haven't met a single person that's felt like they didn't want to do a little bit more in the world. Mm-hmm. And this question of what is impact? What is doing more? What does that look like? How does it manifest? How do we even get started and how do we fit in? It's this kind of consistent line of questioning that I think everyone sort of has, but no one's really taken the time to explore. And so in my case, I've been really trying to unpack it primarily because as an activist or anyone who tries to raise awareness for any issue, you run with this sort of problem of not being able to measure the impact of what you've done. You create something, you put it out in the world, and then you just go okay, well, I got some views, I got some likes, but what changed? And so I wanted to start exploring that nuance. I wanted to figure out what impact meant to different people who are doing good in the world. I wanted to figure out how impact shows up. Was it through the micro decisions that people make on an everyday basis? Is it more the macro, big splashy campaigns that I do? How does it manifest? How is it measured? How does it show up in the world? And so the conversations that I've been having span a really wide berth of people, from Oscar-winning filmmakers to NASA scientists to youth activists to just a huge variety. But so for me, there's a couple reasons that I thought podcasts would be interesting. The first is I love conversations. So similar to you, hosting talks like these, I get a lot of energy from just meeting new people and talking to them. And so when lockdowns happened, I was like, I need to manufacture my own serendipity. And I like to talk to weird people doing good in the world. And so that was the container for the podcast. And then from that point forward, it's really been about trying to dissect and dilute, what are the recurring patterns that you see across different industries? Because as an artist, you try really hard to be unique and different. You want to be the weirdest, most special person in the room, because that's how you can actually charge money for what you do. You don't want to be the same like everyone else. But then when you become an activist, it's the reverse. You want everyone to do what you do. You want the work that you create to be as accessible. You want people to feel inspired so that they can kind of tack onto it. And I think I've sort of had to kind of flow from one mode into the other and try to figure out how those two can coexist, despite the apparent paradox of the two. And so that's how the podcast was born. Positive impact in unexpected places, and it's slowly evolved over time. But I think one of the biggest things for me is it's been a long time that I've done something since I've done something because I enjoy the process of it.
Hmm.
I think that with photography, for me, it reached a point where it was always about the output. What am I going to accomplish with this series? How many people am I going to reach? Like, it was always about the output or the outcomes. And I think it's just because I started having a bigger name. I started working with bigger companies. There were more stakes at play. And I couldn't play anymore. I couldn't have fun. And now
Okay.
I get to do that in a completely different art form because there are no expectations when it comes to audio. Like, no one has any expectations for how my conversational skills should be. So I can start all over from scratch, and I can play again. I can learn. I can be a student, and it's been really, really wonderful.
Yeah. So a question I often ask people about their photography, is it a product or a process? So it sounds like in the past for you, it was a product.
Well, it's evolved, right? So I
Hmm.
remember the days when I first picked it up, like in 2007, I bought my first camera, and it was, I mean, I thought it was about the product, but my product really sucked. So it really was about the process, and I was just
Hmm.
enjoying it. I was learning, I was growing, and I was, I was absorbing knowledge. I was giving it back, and it was this like very like, self-fulfilling kind of motivating thing. But then at some point, I think as it maybe started shifting more towards a career, as when you start having to think about growth and business and metrics and numbers, you veer away from the process, because what you start to recognize is that in order to build a reputation, it requires you to be very regular and very consistent. And so you start becoming more and more formulaic. And so in that way, I feel like a lot of the platforms are doing us a disservice because they don't amplify our creativity. They actually force us into buckets.
Hmm.
So if you're a landscape photographer and you have an Instagram account, you better not post about people. Like that's a terrible, Instagram strategy, right? And you can take Instagram, it could be Facebook, it could be YouTube. It's the same. People expect consistency, and you outsource your life. You're like, I'm now a personality, and you subscribe to me, and I'm not allowed to evolve beyond the confines of what I've sold to you. um, and you could map that onto, say, like a show. So if you watch The Simpsons, if one day Homer was not lazy and dumb, you'd be really frustrated because you're like, that's not the Homer I decided to subscribe to. um, and so I think we're seeing that, except these are real people's lives who might be losing the passion, and then you kind of move from loving the process to being a slave of the
Hmm.
product. And that's a trap that I think is really,
Yeah,
really
I think
hard to get out of.
everyone has to be allowed to change. I mean, we're not the same person we were 10 minutes ago, or we're going to be in 10 minutes. Getting pigeonholed like that has been a real pain for me in a lot of ways. Um, so do you do other art than photography and these new illustrations? I mean, how did you get started? You say you bought your camera in 2007. Who was Ben before that?
Oh, Ben was before 2007. Well, Ben wasn't doing very much as a younger human. I think I really liked video games. I was super nerdy. I loved reading. I played chess. I picked up paintball. I was doing martial arts. I mean, I was just, I guess, a normal teenager. Um, and then when I went to university, I went to university really young. I started at 17. And so that means I went to open house at 16 years old, and I had to figure out what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So obviously I made the wrong decision. I chose hard rock mining engineering. Um, and I chose hard rock mining engineering because I was good at math and physics, and they had a better sales pitch than the mechanical engineers. They just it was like small classroom, a great internship program. You would earn a lot of money. You'd have a lot of travel opportunities, and it just sounded like a good idea. And so I studied hard rock mining, and then 3 work terms later, and 6 months before I was going to graduate, I was like, oh crap, school is ending. What does this mean? This means that this is the rest of my life, is to go in the middle of nowhere and work doing something that I really didn't care about. Um, but I didn't have a better alternative. And so this was 2008 when I graduated. photography was just like this side hobby,
Mhm.
so it wasn't serious enough to pick up. And so I ended up working for 3.5 years as a consultant in a mining company. Um, but what was wonderful about it was I had so much time on the evenings and weekends to do photography. You know, it turns out like you're supposed to spend 40 hours working in your work week, but really your brain is doing all sorts of other things that have nothing to do with work.
Exactly.
So I think for like 25 of those 40 hours, I was just thinking about photography, whatever photo shoots I was planning on doing over the weekend. I'd take my lunch breaks and people would show up and we'd have meetings, and you know, it was downtown, so it was a great way to be central to the rest of the city. So I made it work, and
Mhm.
to the point where I rescheduled my entire work schedule to 10-hour days, 4 days a week. And so I had 3-day weekends to do my photography projects. So with the security of a day job and the, you know, that bottled up creativity that I could then kind of play with on the weekends, I think that's what really enabled me to grow pretty fast and pretty stably. Because I didn't really have to think about, you know, what was expected of me. I could just do whatever I wanted, which was very liberating. Um, but yeah, and then in 2012, I decided to quit my day job. In the impetus for it was kind of funny. I just woke up one morning and I was like, why am I going to work? This is so pointless. I have nothing to do, but I have to show up just because I have to show my face because of the number of hours I have to put in.
Mhm.
And I had this like sinking realization that like, well, I knew this wasn't the thing I wanted to do with for the rest of my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew what I didn't want to do. And if I didn't do anything in 10 years, I'd be sitting at a bigger desk doing the exact same thing. And, and so I just gave my resignation letter 2 weeks later, with no plan. So my parents were pretty distraught. So I came up with like an alternative, and I went to study for my GMAT. So I was going to originally get an MBA. But then the photography thing started working, and it just like, the GMAT is good for 5 years. And so I just like, you know, why don't we just see where this thing goes? And now the GMAT has expired and I never went back to that life. So, yeah. So,
So how did the photography meld into activism?
right. So when I quit my day job in 2012, I was basically just trying to figure out like, oh, I just wanted to travel. I wanted to have adventures. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to create, and I wanted to see whether or not there was some way to make a living off of it. So I was growing a YouTube following. I had like 7,000 followers in 2012, which actually meant something. I think I have more engagement in 2012 than I
Sure.
do now with 330,000 followers on Facebook. And yeah, so I was traveling, and the way I would travel for free was I'd offer to teach a workshop, have a free plane ticket. I'd meet a bunch of
Mhm.
people, so I had a bunch of sofas to crash on, and I could create with them. And then I just wait until the next workshop that I'd go teach somewhere else, and I just kind of bummed my way around all over the world, and by default became an international photographer, not because I was earning money, but because I was shooting internationally all over the world. And that apparently impresses people. So between that and getting better at marketing, I learned to, you know, I've always been interested in creating work that people would see and not just in creating work that resonated with me. And
Mhm.
so I started realizing that, you know, if photographers don't hire other photographers unless you're in the education space. And I wasn't really interested in the education market, which meant that I had to figure out how I was going to reach another demographic. And so there's always this pull to figure out, how do you create content that can go viral? How do you create content that can appeal to anyone? And being a young male with a lot of adrenaline needs, I started doing all sorts of ridiculous stunts, like lighting people on fire or tying them underwater, or, you know, putting them on the edge of skyscrapers. And I just did a lot of these really elaborate projects, and that attracted quite a little bit of attention, which eventually got me work and was able to get some like really large commercial jobs. But and I think that was like the dream, right? To become a commercial photographer was my dream earlier on, because this idea of getting paid to be like, getting paid to do what you do best is like many creatives' dream. But once I got there, and I think I might have gotten there too quickly, I didn't work hard enough for it. I got there in like 2.5 years. I basically had a job that paid more than my entire career combined to that point. Turns out when you get licensing on global billboards, really, really makes a difference and adds up quickly. And and that was like the pinnacle of what I had aspired for, and it just felt empty. Like it felt pointless. It didn't feel like there was anything there. So I actually almost quit photography at that point, and I went off into documentary filmmaking because I was like, oh, I want to make a difference in the world. And when I look at like media and its ability to affect people and raise money, like I had some pretty positive experiences with documentary filmmaking, and so went there for a little while until I realized that I wasn't that great of a documentary filmmaker, and that ultimately just focusing always on like the negative was not really my thing. I quite liked, doing weird, crazy things. And so there was this sort of need to reconciliate, how do you connect purpose with fantasy? And that was like, it's not like a natural combination, right? You look at like usually when you talk about the world's problems, it's like a serious conversation. And so it was only through experimentation I started figuring out that the environment is like an entity that doesn't really have a voice for itself. So it needs conceptualization in order to be represented. My girlfriend came up with the first concept, which was to go storm chasing and use storms as a metaphor for climate change, and put ordinary people in front of them, and that worked pretty good. I ended up tying a model underwater with sharks swimming around because I had already tied a model underwater multiple times, and I figured, well, if I knew how to do that, I could do it with some sharks kind of swimming around to raise awareness for shark conservation. And so that went pretty well. We got like 80,000 petition signatures to create a shark conservation, a shark sanctuary, and hit the front page of Reddit 3 times. And so like things started happening, but there's still like a gap between like doing projects that could get seen and people wanting to hire you. Like just because you can tie a model underwater with sharks swimming around doesn't mean anyone wants to hire you to do it. It's not really a booming market.
You become very specialized.
Yeah. So it was only after I ended up putting a mermaid on 10,000 plastic bottles, like the day after my sister's wedding, after my mom found a mermaid tail in Montreal, that that project got 37 million views on Facebook, and suddenly became something that people could see applied in different contexts. And so like my first major campaign after that was a campaign with Dell. They saw my project with a bunch of plastic bottles and were like, oh, well, if you can do it with plastic bottles, do you think you could do the same thing with electronic waste? And so, taking these little materials and then converting them and creating narratives around them, and so on and so forth. And so that sort of trend just slowly evolved. And I think you become an activist when you stop seeing and you start looking, because like the information is out there, but it's inconvenient, so we turn away. And I've never wanted to care about the environment specifically, but it was just a byproduct of creating campaigns. I had to learn about the problems that I was advocating for. So it's like you have all these things that are problems, but in the pursuit of learning more about them, you get deeper into it. And then you eventually start knowing so much that you would become a hypocrite if you turned away. And so I kind of got, I guess I became like an unwilling activist by pure virtue of the fact that I wanted to do good in the world.
But does learning all that stuff get you depressed, or does it make you more active as you really learn what's happening?
I think it's an ebb and flow. So similar to the creative flow, like you have days where you feel really inspired and you have days where you feel really frustrated. Yeah. I think it's the same with activism. There are different ways to think about it. So I think you have to retain enough hope to not be paralyzed into inaction, but you also have to be realistic about where we are and the work that needs to be done. Because if you default too far to one or the other, you become incapable of tackling the real issues at hand.
Sure.
The other piece of the puzzle that I think is always important to keep in mind is to really make sure that you're addressing the outcome that you're trying to work towards and not just trying to be the hero of the story. And I think as storytellers, that's something that's like a trap you sort of fall into. But these are like all these nuances that slowly build. So really it's sort of a field that you can continuously dive in and never get bored of. I think it never quite stops.
Yeah. For
Yeah.
people that are new here, this conversation is open. I mean, you can unmute and ask questions or pop things into chat. You know, it's just not just Ben and I here. You're all welcome to be part of the conversation.
John, I've got a question. Fine.
Yeah.
So, based on what you were just saying, how do you judge the impact of your work? I mean, how do you know? Like you said, you can be a hero, and I'm looking on the internet right now, and the images are awesome. How do you know what is really being accomplished with those images? Or I mean, there's that balance too, but just how do you judge that or process that?
Yeah, it's a big problem. So, and I think I have a unique perspective on it because the pieces that I've created have over 100 million views on different things. I've been published in like international publications. I've gone viral multiple times. I've seen things get picked up. I see them getting reused. Like my work is in school books. Some of it's in museums. Some of it is in, I think one of my pieces is a stamp on the United Nations. And so it's like a lot of the accolades and the awards that I think a lot of artists pursue, like I've had a number of them. And this question, but what has actually changed, is the piece that I can't resolve. And so what it's led me to pursue, and I guess I'm answering your question in a really roundabout way, but the question it's led me to pursue is that, so awareness isn't enough, because awareness, we're kind of told a lie, I think, as artists. The lie that we're told is that our job is to touch people's hearts and minds. And that once we've done that, like we're done. But what you do when you do that is you give away all the power to know what difference you've made to the other person. It's like saying, I've done my work now, you go figure out what the fuck to do next. And I think that's a problem, because it turns out that I think if we design better for it, like if you take responsibility to figure out how this art is going to make a difference, then you would start creating the containers around which to measure the impact of it. Not to say that you can ever measure all of it, but you can measure more of it. So one of the things that I've realized recently is that, earlier in my career, as I was trying to do these viral things, it means reaching as many people as possible. You kind of go and you say, well, if only everyone knew that plastic was a problem, then everything would change. So you reach as many people as you want, but all that energy gets like dissipated and diluted. And I'm not saying that it doesn't do anything. I'm sure it helps to move the conversation forward, but it becomes really immeasurable what the impact has been. So of late, actually pre-COVID, the campaigns that I was designing was the complete reverse. It wasn't so much about how many people can I reach looking outwards, but let's design a container in which art is the catalyst for change at a smaller level. So let's change one school, let's change one community, let's change one neighborhood, let's change one company, and let's use art as the catalyst for that change. And it doesn't have to be about me. Maybe it would actually be better if we were finding like a local student, a local advocate, and elevating them to the international stage, right? Everyone loves a good David versus Goliath story. And elevate them, and you create that success story. And now that success story can be the thing that you try to make global. And actually we see this all the time. Like, the one supermarket in Thailand that decided to use banana leaves instead of plastic bags. That story gets spread everywhere because we want to see more success stories. We don't want to just see more awareness stories. And so that's something that I'm starting to design for. And I'm starting to realize that it's less about, it's really about trying to think about what you're actually trying to change, and to make sure that you're gunning after it. And I think when you ask yourself those questions, the why, and you ask multiple times in multiple different ways, and you start really getting to the root of the problem. It's not just, I want to create a thing because I want to feel important and I want to feel like I'm doing something. It's, I'm creating something because it's an effective solution to this problem. And so then you look for need in a different way. And so these are the conversations that I'm kind of having with the podcast that I'm doing, that have nothing, it's the whole like bottom of the iceberg thinking. That has nothing to do with what you see on the top. So I don't know. I don't have like an answer like that I've measured specifically, but I think there's a way of thinking that I'm in the process of trying to develop. And it comes from the realization that it doesn't matter how successful I am as an individual. It's about making sure that everyone has more tools at their disposal. Because if everyone could do 1% more, like this would be like phenomenally amazing. So the big question that I have right now in my mind is, how might we convert awareness into action and measure that more effectively? So that's a big question that I think every single artist has. And if we can solve for that, like you'd unleash like the billion creatives onto the world that could now, if you can't measure it, then you can't sell it. If you can't sell it, then no one's ever going to pay you to do it. And that means there's never going to be a career path in it. And that means that all these like charity projects just end up being something you do on the evenings and weekends. So I think it addresses a fundamental problem. And I don't know if I'm the right person to solve it. I don't know how to solve it, but I'm asking those questions.
So that's your podcast, is that the impacteverywhere.org site?
Yes, the podcast is at the impacteverywhere.org site. And it doesn't go so technical into this, but it's more like me having conversations with a really wide variety of people to unpack and figure out what metrics they use. And they don't always have answers, but there was, I talked to the director of Oceans Campaign at Greenpeace. I talked to a youth engagement leader at World Vision. Next week, we're releasing an episode with a guy who founded something called the Accountability Lab, which seeks to name and fame people instead of naming and shaming people, to address corruption, but more from like, how might you elevate more positive stories rather than just keep pointing out all the problems in society. This week is an artist, an art consultant who helps artists become activists. And she has these amazing stories of how she collaborated with a rapper in Liberia in order to address gender violence. And by creating these club bangers, you affect culture at a fundamental level. You start shifting norms in a way that only artists can do, because when people see art, their guards are down. They're not being sold something. They're just being presented one person's version of the truth. And so she has like an entire perspective on the power of art and its ability to shift norms. There's a human trafficking survivor last week who was on board, who was just talking about how, we need to stop elevating people. So this is funny. This is like directly in contradiction to the Accountability Lab guy, because she says we have to stop elevating people and looking up to them because humans are corruptible. So it's just really fun to hear all these different perspectives on how different people are tackling impact. And I just can't get enough of this. And I think that, too many photography shows or too many art shows in general focus on the technique, but it's about the stories that you want to tell. At some point you get saturated in the technique. It's about what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, why you're going to say it in that way, and what are you going to accomplish with it. And that's like not sexy. It's not exciting. There's no product to push. There's no one that wants to sponsor it. But I think that's where like the real juicy stuff happens.
Yeah, for the people that are watching this, they may want to start maybe with the Photographers Without Borders, your Daniela De Silva.
Yes, she's great.
So yeah, I mean, especially with all the riots and things that have been going on lately, and how to be an effective activist, but also to protect people. I didn't go out and photograph any of it because I usually photograph people, and I don't think people want to be, we want to protect people, because afterwards you have people suing to get your images and the like, and use them for court cases and the like. So be an effective activist, but being true to yourself and to the people you're supporting.
Yeah.
My day job is building websites, and I spent a lot of time with how many clicks did this get? How many times do people go buy something? And like, if you're selling stuff, that's important because that pays for groceries. But that's not change. That's not someone changing their mind about something. And I like the fact that you're like, okay, we've got enough of just, here are a stack of problems. Here's a stack of solutions. Here's what we can do. Go do this thing. You'll make the world a little bit better, and that's okay. That makes the problems less huge. It makes the solutions less impossible, and it makes it more doable. So I think you're doing really good stuff. Thank you.
No, thank you. There's a good question that, one of my guests told me, which was, she finds it interesting to think about impact rather than think about what have I accomplished. Think about what wouldn't have happened if you hadn't created what you created. And you actually realize that that every little action that we do, every, like the daily conversations that we have, the way we show up in our everyday lives, like these have like tremendous repercussions on the world that we want to create, the world we want to live in. So even just starting there, you know, start with what's proximate to you, because that's the place and space in which you have the biggest influence. And then you can start expanding from there. Is like it has been like a really good reframe for me, especially being on lockdown and just feeling like, oh man, I'm trapped. I can't do anything. The world is like falling apart. And like, what do I do? Well, like, how can I show up differently? How can I check in more on the people that I care about? How can I make sure that everyone's okay? You know, like, and it's just a way to shift it from feeling disempowered to feeling empowered.
So do you have a most memorable project that you worked on?
Oh man. It's so hard. Like that's such a hard question, because it's sort of like, what's your favorite project?
Sure.
And every project is different. Like, is it more memorable to be hanging off a 40-story skyscraper in the Philippines, or walking across lava at like 6 a.m. as the sun is rising and just feeling like you're gonna bake? Or, you know, is it more memorable to being like, you know, trying to do a photo shoot underwater between a toxic layer of hydrogen sulfide, you know, 30 meters underwater? Or there's just like, every single project is different, and everyone is sort of special in its own way. For me, my photo shoots are almost like, I think, a diary of my life. I can't actually remember very much of what happens in between my projects, which is kind of problematic. I have like this a horrible memory. And so these different, like, these all just represent like facets of my life and moments and experiences that have happened. I think maybe I don't think it's like maybe the most memorable, but I just remember this like overwhelming moment of sadness when I was in Greece. I was doing a project for Greenpeace, and we wanted to show, so every 60 seconds, a truckload of plastic flows into the ocean. And that's all well and good, but like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? And so we wanted to bring that visceral emotion and visual to life in a beautiful, like, digestible way. And so I ended up on this island in Greece called Corfu that has no recycling, but they also have no drinkable water. So everyone's drinking out of bottled water, and a government subsidizing it. So it's really, really cheap. It's maybe less than $1 for like 2 liters of water. And so we just set up shop there, and I didn't really know anyone. And we just said like, all right, we're going to be here for the next like 10 days. If you have plastic bottles, like, please drop it off at the marina. And we were trying to collect 1 truckload. We ended up with like 2 truckloads in a week.
Wow.
Just from putting the word out to the local news stations and radio stations, and got the schools involved. And we spent the time just tying them all together with fishing wire. And so we strung all of these together into bundles, and then we packed them into a truck, and then we put it from the truck into the boat, and then we just like went out into the ocean and just like tossed all of these plastic bottles out into the ocean, and tried to do a photo shoot of it. And all these bottles were tied together, so they weren't going anywhere, but they were so hard to control. And so you're sitting there like trying to like wrangle these things so they look pretty for your photograph. We're like a team of like 15 volunteers just trying to control all this plastic, and just thinking like, man, this is so impossible to like, for us to control these free floating large pieces of plastic that are all tied together. And to imagine like what it would represent to actually have to go and take that all back, you know, like the Ocean Cleanup Project and all these things that we put so much hope in, like the scale of the solutions relative to the scale of the problem was just so depressing. And then I remember like leaving Greece and like flying back home, and then just going into the supermarkets, and it was just like, you go into a supermarket and you just see like, I mean, you can't find things that don't have plastic.
Right.
It's harder to find things without plastic than it is to find with, right? By far. And I think there are moments definitely like that, which are just, it's one thing to read about it and you know it, and these are the facts that circle you. And then, but there's another to just be like, you know, you're like knee deep in a bunch of crap that you've just collected in a couple days. And it's just so overwhelming sometimes that I think there's something to be said about like real visceral physical experiences that
Yeah, I mean, you collected that stuff in only
yeah.
2 days. Think about how much comes out of there every week, every month, every year.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
it's
just
wild. It's
impossible.
wild.
I mean, it's
So,
hard for us to understand those numbers, I think. You know, big,
yeah.
big, big numbers are just numbers. They don't mean anything to us. I mean, part of the message is how to get people to understand what numbers really are.
Yeah, well, that's where the arts come in, right? Like the
Yeah.
arts have the power, we, as artists, we do close the gap between the heart and the mind. And so it's like, there's this responsibility, at least I feel there's this responsibility to leverage that to the most effective, the most
Mhm.
effective level possible. And I think I've been, as time has gone on and I've done so many of these like awareness projects, they've gotten bigger. I've won awards but like nothing changes. And it's really hard to feel like it really matters. Like what if I go and I make another installation that gets more awards, that gets another couple million views, like what does it mean? And I don't know. And so it's actually been a blessing to have COVID sort of slow things down, because the big question that I'm, trying to sit on is like, how can I become more effective at what I do? And that's sort of why I'm starting to like focus less on the doing and more on the thinking and the strategy behind it. And I'm hoping that that will lead to something. And it may not, and I might just end up with nothing to do for the next couple of years, which would be fine. It's just my ego. I'm back home living with my parents. This is the room that I went to university in. And so I have there's like all the work that my ex-girlfriends have drawn for me. That I just have like collected over the years. And it's just like, it's been humbling, but in like the best of ways. Like to have to figure out who you are without your story is such a gift. That I don't think I would have had the privilege of exploring if I wasn't like locked down and had all my work stripped away from me.
Yeah. So for people here who just want to get started in their journey to affect change, where do they start? They just start with one person? They start with small groups? What is your advice to people?
It starts with listening.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really the biggest thing. It's not, you don't go in to solve anything. You go in just to like listen and to care and to empathize and to understand. And I think when you understand the struggles that people are going through, the way that you can support them based on the unique skill sets that you have will become apparent on their own. But you have to care first and foremost. Like if you're not embedded in the homeless community and you're just like, oh, I want to help the homeless people, and you just go and you start taking pictures, then you're not considering the needs of the person whose story you're actually telling.
Right.
Like you're taking their power away by just thinking that you're going to come in and solve their problem. Right? So figure out what you care about, whether it's indigenous rights, whether it's environmental rights, and just go and figure out what other people are doing. And be curious, right? The most powerful thing, the most powerful skill, the one that I'm trying to develop right now and curate a little bit more in my own life, by adding habits around it, is like the sense of curiosity. Because if you're curious, you'll never stop asking questions, and eventually you'll ask the right one that'll unlock some like phenomenal new opportunity for not only you, but for the people that you care about.
Yeah, I think going out to the world and questioning things and seeing the world through a kid's eyes and just being amazed at everything, just don't get jaded into everything. It's a good way to.
Yeah, it's hard not to feel jaded, but like, in the same, it's sort of like gratitude exercises. Like if you spend your days focusing on the negative things, you're going to find them.
Of course.
If you spend your days focusing on the positive and beautiful things in the world, you're going to find them too. And it's kind of like, yes, you have to be aware of what's going on in the world, but also, find the things that inspire you, that keep you energized and empowered. Find the communities that resonate with you and figure out what they need. And this, it's just kind of like a more positive way to live. and like, ultimately, it's sort of, it's the balance between knowing that you're not important at all. Like nothing you do really matters, but also realizing that everything you do really matters, and holding space for those two, like paradoxical reality, right? Because if you are one piece of a movement, then it's not about you, it's about the movement. and so you have to remember that you're just one piece of the puzzle, but you're also the entire piece of the puzzle for your own life and everyone that you touch in your life. And so in that way, you're like super important. So always remembering that those two, and I think that helps to keep the ego in check, to figure out like where to go and what to explore and what to do.
Yeah, so Celeste has popped a question into the chat. How are Von's projects brought to the average person? Are any of your projects displayed at universities, concerts, or locations where the average person may gather?
Well, I don't know where people are gathering right now, but
Okay, pre-COVID.
but my work is online. It's free. I mean, that I have no ads on my YouTube videos. I have no ads on my Facebook videos. I offer my photos for free at cost to whoever wants to buy them. I was actually trying to find a poster distributor because right now I sell through SmugMug, which goes through Bay Photo, but like I don't think it's about the quality of it. Like I actually want people to like put this up in places because I think it empowers them. I don't know how else to get things out into the world. I mean, if you want, or if anyone wants to spread the story, bring it into classrooms or otherwise, I receive messages from teachers or students, and I always reply. I'll sometimes pop in on a Skype call or something. I mean, the work is created so that it can be seen and heard by people. And this drives my agent nuts, but like I've just kind of approached this as like, there are the people with money and they're going to pay for everything, and then everything else I'm just going to give away for free. And it makes it really hard because like it's actually excluded me from an entire revenue stream. Like I can't put anything in galleries or create limited editions of my stuff because I'm giving it out. But there's a sense that like the work only exists because so many people from the community have come together to contribute, to bring something to life. So why am I the person that gets to profit from it because I pressed the button or because I ignited the whole thing? Like it doesn't really feel fair. And then of course you could argue, well, you could track all the people that get involved and pay everyone else and so forth. And I'm like, that is way too much administrative work, and I am not interested in being an administrator.
Yeah, so other people in the room have some questions that they want to ask.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Feel free to unmute.
In regard to the parting of the Plastic Sea, how did you come into the relationship with Zero Waste Saigon? I'm looking at the website, and how did the genesis of this project come to be?
Yeah, so Parting of the Plastic Sea is a Guinness record making art installation made out of 168,000 plastic straws that were collected over the course of 9 months. And the way I was connected to Zero Waste Saigon, which was a nonprofit partner that initiated the entire cleanup and reached out to me, was she was just following my work. She had seen a bunch of other projects, and one day just came up with the courage to say like, hey, how do I get you to Vietnam? And I said, well, there needs to be resources, materials, sponsors, like all this stuff. And she's like, okay, but like, give me some specifics. Like, what do you actually need? I'm like, I don't know. Like, it really depends on the problem we're trying to solve. Like, what are you guys working on? And she's like, we're trying to educate the Vietnamese population here. We're the first NGO that's really been pushing like plastic free. We have all these restaurants on board, and straws are a big issue. I'm like, oh, cool, straws. Like, I'm pretty sure I could think of something cool if you were able to collect something like 100,000 straws, but you're a pretty small organization, so I don't think it, I can't, I don't know if you'd be able to do it. And she's just like, oh, no problem, I can totally do 100,000 straws. Like, can I make a website and announce that you're coming so that I can collect these straws? And I was like, all right, she sounds serious, let's just say yes. And then 2 days later, there was a website that was live with like with this announcement that I was going to be coming, and she had like started rallying all these people, and I was like, oh shit, this is actually happening. And then it became like pretty logistical. It was like, okay, well, if I had the straws, what would I do? How would I create things? And it's the cascade effect. And then like, if I was going to do this and I need to build an installation, if I'm building an installation, I need a place to put it. If we have a place to put it, where are we going to put it? Who's going to pay for it? And so the sort of like cascade effect, I think it's always easier to start a project when you have the first piece of the puzzle. And that piece of the puzzle that you want is the thing that people go like, oh, I've never heard of that before. I want to be in on that project. So it's kind of like saying, hey, Starbucks, we are planning to collect 100,000 straws with this international artist. Would you like to be a part of this project? We're going to build something that maybe will break a Guinness World Record. It's like, it's exciting because you're already selling like some core piece of the puzzle. And so for me, I think in every single project that I do, there is a Julia or Zero Waste Saigon that's in the picture, a local partner that wants the project more, as much as, if not more than I do, because they're the ones with all the local connections. They understand the problem. They know the people, and I can just come in and empower them. And so I always look for like the ones that are willing to do the work. And that's just generally like, it's kind of like dating. You meet someone, you don't know if you're really right for each other. You just keep chatting. And at one point, someone makes a move and it either works or it doesn't. So, yeah.
And so you, what, 7 years into your relationship now?
No, we're 5 years into our relationship.
5 years.
I have
okay.
a long distance cross-continental relationship with my girlfriend. We have never officially lived together. We met by email. She had seen some of my work online, said hello. And then we first met in Cambodia because she was taking photographs of a guy who had no arms and no legs traveling across Asia, and they were doing that for 6 weeks. And I was like, that sounds so cool. I'm trying to learn how to make films. Can I come and make a documentary of y'all? And I just flew over, and yeah, that's how we met, and we've been in a relationship since. So
that worked out, but the documentary filmmaking's not so much for you.
No, but I did make a film of this though.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's a story of Chris Cook and the Limbless Man. I think if you type Von Wong Limbless Man, you might find it. Yeah, on YouTube.
Yeah.
I mean, I can make films. You know, the thing is like, so I think there are two core skills that I have. The first is like the power of narrative. Like I understand what might make a good story. And that story can be translated into written form. It can be translated into a video. It can be translated into a photograph, right? So the power of narrative is something that applies ubiquitously across every platform. And then the second thing that I'm good at is collaborations, and I think that's just born purely from the fact that I suck at everything. Like I'm very mediocre at stuff. So I need to find people who are cooler than me to like uplift everything. You know, I've participated, like if you lock me in a room with a bunch of photographers and we have the exact same model with the exact same gear and the exact same stuff, like I'm really mediocre. What makes my projects interesting is all the stuff around it.
Sure, you can pull things together.
Sorry?
Yeah, you can pull things together. You
yeah,
can
but
delegate.
pulling things together is really just getting people to believe that they can do something that they didn't think was possible. And so, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, that was it.
Well, you started to answer a question I wanted to ask, which is that, you know, you're seem to be, and I think you would agree, the kind of artist that, you know, you don't sit still. You talked about not becoming trapped by product, and, you know, now you're doing the activist work, and you know, and we've talked a lot about your work, and now you're starting to talk about who you are. And so I'm just wondering, like, if you could just reflect a little bit more on, you know, who are you really if you imagine your whole life of creative work, like how will you see yourself, you know? And you started to talk about that with the power of narrative, or I'm just curious, like, what's the bigger picture of Von Von, less so than Von's work, you know? And you can take that question or not, or anywhere you want, but it's just kind of interesting to me, you know, because you're not a thing, you're something else. I don't know.
Yeah. I think I'm driven by the question of how. So, okay, I'll segue to it, but I want to start with a story. There's an amazing TED Talk called "The 5 Lies We Tell Ourselves About Death." I can't remember the person who said it, but it's one of the most influential kind of talks that I've had in my life, and it basically says that like our entire goal as a human being is to live forever in some way, shape, or form. So we want to live biologically we reproduce. Technologically, we seek to like transfer our consciousness. We religiously we think about heaven. So like we're always trying to like figure out how to live forever in some way, shape, or form. But at one point in our life, we realized that maybe there could just be nothing, and we have to find a way to live with the fact that everything we've ever done doesn't actually matter. And so like how do you live with the understanding that like everything you've ever done might be forgotten in the greater scope of time, and that nothing you ever do really matters? How do you continue to live? And he says that like he's found it helpful to think about life like the two covers of a book. Like the two covers of a book, we're born and we die. And inside of that book, we can try to tell the best story possible. And it doesn't matter who reads it, how many times it's read, or whether it's never read at all. It'll still make a really great book. And so that's kind of how I am trying to live my life. So like, am I telling a good story? Am I putting my life to good use? Am I giving as much as I can? Am I being like the best version of myself? You know how like we are different versions of ourselves depending on who we hang around and depending on where we are in life? Like I try to be the best version of myself at every point in time. And so I think me as an individual, I'm someone who I try to show up as someone who's kind, who's caring, who's loyal, who checks in on people whenever he can, who really wants the best. I am blunt to a fault, where sometimes I can actually offend people, but there's never any like bad intention behind it. I just say what comes to mind, and I try to be helpful. I love solving problems, and I think I'm consistently struggling with feeling a sense that I don't fit into the boxes that exist within the world, right? Like I am not a photographer. I'm not really a producer. I'm not really like an artist either. Like I'm sort of an engineer in some ways, but like I don't really fit in any boxes. And so there's this consistent tension between it's like needing to stand out, but also needing to be accepted. And I kind of exist in that tension. So yeah, I don't know if that's like expansive enough. I can talk about myself all day, but we'll stop there.
So what do you want to see for your kids and grandkids? Where do you want the world to go?
I don't want kids.
Okay. I don't have kids myself.
Yeah. I don't want kids because I just think there are too many humans in the world, and why produce another one when there are so many who need help? So if I ever wanted the experience of a family, we would adopt. And my girlfriend feels the same. My mom isn't too excited about the idea of me getting a vasectomy, but there's a brand new baby in the house, so I hope that will like fill that urge. But in terms of the world, I find it really hard to be optimistic. I know that we always overestimate what can be accomplished in 3 years and underestimate what can be accomplished in 10, let alone 30. But there's this true skepticism that the systems that we have built in the way they currently exist in the world will get us through the next 30 years unscathed in some way, shape, or form. I look to the polarization of the rich and the poor. I look to the melting of the ice caps from an environmental perspective, but also from a global politics perspective. It's unlocking new trade routes that are currently creating tensions between Russia and China. I look at the rising tensions between the East and the West. I look at rise of global sea levels, which will lead to massive migration. I mean, the sea level only needs to rise by a meter, and you have basically the entire country of Bangladesh moving up north, which is over hundreds of millions of new refugees that are just on the cusp of being thrust upon the world. And if 7 million Syrian refugees threw the entire EU into disarray, imagine what a few 100 million will do. And you just look at all these tensions, you look at the lack of social cohesion between people and the inability for us to agree on what needs to happen next. And I find it really hard to be hopeful. but that being said, like, it doesn't mean, like, just because you know you're going to lose the war doesn't mean you don't fight the battles, right? So I still think there's there's objectively speaking, like if everyone just like laid down their hands and said, well, we're screwed anyways, then obviously then it would be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's sort of like you have the view, but then you have the hope, and then somewhere in the middle of those two lies what you can do about it, and you just have to do the best that you can. So yeah, I find it hard to be positive, but at the same time there's nothing else to do. Like what, like we can't afford to not do anything.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So go out and be the best you can be.
Yeah, well, like just be the best version of yourself, and
Uh-huh.
it'll never be enough, but it'll also be enough.
Great. Well, we're right at the top of the hour there, so I think that's, unless anyone else has something to chime in, Seshu put a link to the TED Talk in the chat if people want to check that out.
It's amazing.
Last minute input from anyone here? Want to say anything? Feel free to unmute.
I'll just say thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for tuning in, and yeah, being patient and hearing my rambles about life. I'm guessing
great.
it's pretty different from the average photographer talk, but hopefully it was interesting nonetheless.
Oh, very, very. But speaking of photographer talks, coming up on Thursday, I'm getting together the old Epson Print Academy crew. So that's like Jeff Shuey, Greg Gorman, Mac Holbert, J. Paul Caponegro. So that should be an interesting time here. And that's at 10 o'clock Pacific and 1 Eastern on Thursday. So I'm just going to sign us out of Facebook right now.
Woo.
Stop the live stream. And we'll stop this recording here.